This is Jeremy Wentworth-Stanley. I'm the fellow who has a hyphen in my name. The hyphen is silent, but I am anything but that. This is a departure from our traditional discussions. We have Jeremy Wentworth-Stanley, the Voice of Respectonomics, and Sarah Benton, who is my co-host. And she is not able to be with us today, so this is going to be an unusual attempt to go solo. So you have Jeremy Wentworth-Stanley on his own, the Voice of Respectonomics, and of course you're more than willing and able to let us have your opinions on how a solo works. What we're talking about this morning, this is in the morning, but what we're going to be talking about is e to the power of 3. Now, that may sound a little mathematical. You might even think Einstein's in the background. Actually, what e to the 3 means is we're looking at e from 3 points of view. We're talking about education, we're talking about empowerment, and we're talking about exploration. Each one starts with the letter E, E for education, E for empowerment, and E for exploration. And the mathematics of saying to the power of 3 is significant. Let's take a straightforward formula of 3 times 5. 3 times 5 is 15. However, if in fact we said no, 5 cubed, or 5 to the power of 3, we would end up 5 times 5 times 5, which would give us 125. Well, 125 is a great deal larger than that proverbial 15. I think it's a factor of 8 times larger. So when we talk about e to the power of 3, what we're talking about here is an exponential geometrical expansion of what happens when we enable education, empowerment, and exploration to come into one orbit. The issue here is that education is the starting gate for all of us. There's not one person that I'm aware of that hasn't come into life and being educated in one shape or form. Some in the more formal school setting, some through life, some through experience. But whatever that basis is, we are educated. And the word educate is a very important word. From the Latin, is from ex and duco, which means to be led out of, to leading out of. Ductwork that you have in your house, that is from the Latin duco, to lead. So we are being led out of where we are into another area. Education does that. It's a constant, it's a continual, I think the expression is continuous process, meaning to say it never really stops. I was once told, and I knew this lady who had left school when she was, I think, 14, and came from a really very poverty-stricken background. And later in life, I was told that she was one of the most educated people that I personally would have known. And I was rather surprised at this comment, knowing that she hadn't been at school and so on. But the point that was made was that she wanted to continue to learn and had made a habit of continuing to learn. Now, to the business person, the politician, the leader, the community leader listening to this may sound like a sort of, yeah, that's nice. Why don't we all get educated? And that's fine. It's got a sort of moral tone to it. It's got a sense of ethical propriety to it, a sense of equality, inclusiveness, and all these big words. But the truth of the matter is, in the free world of economics, dare I say, capitalism, but in the world of expansion, the world of addressing different needs as they arise, education is a central theme. And why the education is so important to the business person has 3 specific areas that we need to consider. And I'm talking now about business. Excuse me. The first one is that we need people who are qualified to do the job. That may sound incredibly, shall I say the word obvious, but it is obvious that you want people who are qualified. If you go to the dentist, you kind of hope and expect you'd be very surprised if the dentist didn't have credentials, or the doctor, or the pilot, or the metallurgist, or the biologist. We expect all of these people to be educated and or trained. And the key here is that in the businessman's life, the idea that your people, that your staff, your employees are in fact well educated is a sort of like essential. The second part of it is this, though. We have a world today, and the buzzword is volatile, another word is changing. Whatever word you care to use, the truth of the matter is the world is in a very, very rapid orbit, that things that we thought were right yesterday turn out to be very different today, practices that we thought were useful. If you put artificial intelligence in front of people 25 years ago, they would have smiled. Today, it's a different kind of smile. It may not be necessarily a smile that says, I like it, but it is nonetheless, there's an acceptance of these new technologies that are emerging very, very quickly. Matter of fact, if you look at the history of technology, you'll find that each major technology takes place at half the distance of the one before. So in other words, when we came out of the Ice Age and came into the Stone Age, that was 500 years. Then we went into the Iron Age, 250 years. Then we went to the Bronze Age, 125 years. We keep shortening up the time in which the new technologies are upon us, so that we had the Industrial Revolution, then we had the Production Revolution, then we had the Technology Revolution, and whatever you define this current revolution as, it is happening very quickly. Therefore, from an educational point of perspective, it's important that people are not only educated for what they are doing, but to be educated for what they're not doing. In other words, semper paratus, always be prepared, always be looking around the corner. And education is a prime way of not only dealing with the existing, but also dealing with the future. And the third reason why that education is so valuable is it becomes that sense of empowerment that anybody in the workforce, be they at the proverbial front counter or at the top of the ivory tower, either and or, it's important that people who are in the place of responsibility, people who are representing the corporation, the business, the community, the political party, whatever it is, but you want those people to be innovative. You want them to be able to come up with new ideas. You want them to be able to take existing ideas and to reshape them for the current circumstance. So all of this comes back to this whole fundamental issue of being educated. Now, the education today, if you say to most people, if you're sitting in your coffee shop at 9 o'clock in the morning and chatting around, the common complaint is education isn't what it used to be. I don't want to sound like I'm some kind of 19th century looking back sort of individual, but I do want to make one or two points about current education that I think are very important. We need the education to move from this sort of sense that it's being everybody gets through. We need to get back into a pass or fail. Now, so many people think of pass and fail as being something that is degrading. There's something that's not nice about it. It's separating sheep and goats one from the other. It's got sort of apparently some kind of impression that's not very favorable. The truth of the matter is the whole concept of passing and failing is in fact one of respect. If you have that aptitude and the studying and all the things that go into it, surely to goodness, something that says, or some kind of record that shows that one has passed and not failed, is in fact a mark on one's respect or one's dignity. It is in fact building one up. If one has failed, then there's every reason to be able to look within oneself or to look within the structure to see what is the reason for that failing. It's a standard joke, practically, I'm not really embarrassed to tell you, but I came from a very, very robust education, at least up until, well, in the UK. And the one thing that surprises, I think, you, me, and probably most people is the two subjects that I failed. One was English, and the other was public speaking. Well, I mean, as you listen to this, you can say, yeah, I get that. Well, no, the truth of the matter is, I failed because I didn't conform to the standards that they wanted. Fine. But at the same time, what is interesting is that I recognized there had to be some work on my end to work up this business of the English language deficiency or the ability to speak publicly. The thing I'm getting at is that we should not look at pass and fail as a moral concern, but rather be looking at it as a very practical tool that identifies the ability to go to the next level. If you think about it, every single thing we do in life has a degree of passing or failing and has been tested. Let's think of the pilot, for example. You hardly want somebody who says, oh, yeah, I was walking through the airport and decided I would go and sit behind the controls. No, there's a formal process for being trained and being allowed to be certified as a pilot. So, first of all, we need to bring back the pass and the fail. Excuse me. A lot of people say things like that if you talk to a school teacher, the proverbial answer that comes back is one, of course, is the structural issue. But the other issue, though, is that families do not support the education generally. And of course, there's some truth to that because so many parents are literally out. Between the two of them, they're out 24 hours a day because each one of them has a job nowadays. So there's 12 hours on one person, 12 hours on the other, 12 plus 12 is 24. So there's a lot less home vigilance, home intercommunication than would have been the case maybe 25, 50 years ago. The whole essence then of passing and failing will be to bring to the parents or to the guardian's interest that that individual has not in fact passed a test and therefore is not allowed to go to the next level. There isn't much point, if you think about it in your own very practical world, things that you test, and if they don't work, you say, well, before I do the next thing, I'm going to have to fix that. So with that sort of sense of logic in mind, therefore the pass and the fail make sense to the student, they make sense to the onlooker, and they make sense to the parent or the guardian who is then better able to look at what steps need to be taken. Now, one of the problems with passing and failing is, I mentioned English and public speaking. Most of us have aptitudes in one area or another. Some people are very linear, some people are mathematical, some people are lateral thinking, some people are excellent at memory work, and the list goes on. But one thing I can be absolutely certain of is not all people are at the same level at the same time, at the same age. It just doesn't make sense. That is irrational. So, the system that I was brought up with, which I am recommending, is rather than having you're in grade 1, 2, 3, or 4, each subject is its own grade, so that everybody starts off in grade 1, but somebody who is excellent, let's say, at French will move up into grade 3 or 4, but may still be in grade 1 or something in another subject. My own case, I may be, in fact, I was excellent at Latin and Greek, and I was in the top grades for that. But at the same time, I was in the bottom grades in geography, and I lived to tell the tale. It's true. Geography doesn't come to me easily. I don't have a sense of proverbial direction. However, what is important is I was always with the people that were my, what would you call it, my academic peers. I was comfortable where I was, so that The next thing that needs to be done, we've talked about passing and failing. We need to have a system that allows the subject to be the grade, not the overall. Now, that brings in another point in the very school system, and that is that there are some teachers who are excellent at teaching math and some who are excellent at teaching English. In that instance, that allows then that teacher's work and his proclivity or her proclivity to be applied to where they can get the best results with their students. So it becomes a far more efficient model from that point of view as well. Now, we've talked about the passing and the failing. We've talked about the grading. We also need to have something more robust when it comes to relative testing. In other words, how many times do you hear of a university or a college accepting one school but not another because they think that school undermarks or overmarks or something else marks? The point of the matter is that having a standardized system would make sense, so that if we had a standardized national system, we are talking to an international audience. So I'm talking from a Canadian perspective, but the Canadian perspective would be there would be a Canadian test. It could be at any subject at any time. So, for example, if you were very advanced in math and you wanted to take this advanced math test when you're 15 years old, for example, that would be perfectly acceptable. So you could take these national tests at different times, different levels. You probably take them throughout your life. The point of the matter is then, we're taking this concept of education very seriously. Now, we've explained or talked about how it would benefit the business. We think in terms of how it would produce innovation, flexibility, and so on. And if you've noticed, corporations today, businesses generally, are all involved in continuing education. And that alone needs a little bit of explanation. Continuing education tends to be to keep the staff current with new technologies, regulations, and so on. And that's fine. But one of the things that business needs to be doing, governments need to encourage, is that supposing I'm in a very technical world of aerospace engineering, I should be encouraged to go and get other courses under my belt, not necessarily related to what I'm doing. Education is like a seed bed. It grows different things at different times, but keeping your eye on the total seed bed is a way that all crops, all yields, all blooms can flourish. So that if I'm doing the aerospace engineering, and I want to go and take a course on the history of art, the whole system should be allowing me to do that and to be encouraging me to go and get those extra courses, because education it's like an estuary. It feeds and feeds and feeds. It spreads from one source and goes to many others. And in a world where things are changing, that sense of mutability, that sense of being able to adapt to different conditions becomes all the more when we find out we're being educated in something that is different from what you might call your mainstream activity. So we've now covered passing and failing. We've talked about the going by grade by subject. We've now talked about national or international might even be better, testing. And we're also talking about business, governments, communities encouraging and promoting education in any and many different subjects. What I'd like to go to now, though, is what is the basis then of this education that we keep going on about? What are the other benefits? One of them, of course, is empowerment. That when we empower people, as education does, that is when they will develop a sense of conviction, they will sense of even courage. They will come out of their proverbial cocoon and be able to present new ideas. It's one of the most, not only does it produce that creativity, but it produces the ability to speak it out. If you are not educated, there's always that lingering feeling that someone else is smarter than I am and nobody's going to listen to me. Well, the counterpoint to that is then, if we are educated, then we will develop within ourselves a much greater sense of robust conviction. We will be able to go out and say, I've got an idea and this is how it works. So it's not only the quality of the idea, but the delivery of the idea becomes embedded in this concept of empowerment. So we've got the education that leads to the empowerment, and empowerment leads to something else. It leads to exploration. It it begs that idea of, I wonder what's underneath that stone. I wonder what's underneath that picture. I wonder what's behind that piece of machinery. You remember, we don't see it so often nowadays, but looking back over the years, 50 years ago or so, if you were given a toy, it was pretty much as given that within a matter of hours, that toy would be in 100 parts. And although that might appear to be destructive at one end, what in fact was a lot of exploration going on. And we see exploration. I mean, we explore the oceans, we're exploring the universe, we've got SpaceX trying to get us up forever to Mars. I mean, all of these kinds of things, they're all exploratory. We talk about exploratory when we even go and see the doctor and he says, or she says, I'm going to explore something else. So exploration is a very big part of the equation. And if we can encourage the education and the empowerment and the exploration, those are three E's that do become exponential. They work on the par of themselves. They become the triple effect, but not just not an arithmetical sense of just 3 plus 3 plus 3, but rather they become this geometrical progression. They become this amazing expansion where you get this, each one backing up the other. The empowerment says, I want to be educated. The exploration says, I want to be educated. The education says, I want to be empowered. The empowerment says, I want to be in the business of exploration. Each one feeds and builds on itself, and they're available to each one of us as human beings. Respectonomics is emphatic that what at the basis of what all of our experiences is the dignity and the self-respect, the self-worth of the human being. And I do not think there are many ways that can be improved upon better than through this concept of the three E's, or the E to the power of three. That is education, empowerment, and exploration. Those might sound like a high-end note to leave on, but I'm going to give you three E's, though, that we constantly fight, that are constantly in our face. That this is why these three E's that we've talked about are so important and so valuable, not only personally, but in the broader sense of the community. But the three E's that frighten all of us are entitlement, elitism, and eviction. The entitlement, of course, is I'm entitled, I don't need to do the work. There's the elitism, I know more than you do. And there's the eviction. Eviction's a nasty word. We talked about conviction of ideas when we're educated. Eviction is that nasty sense of rejection, that nasty sense of, you're out of my life, you don't matter, I don't have to think about you again. And when we're opposed to those, countering those three E's in the world today, what could be a more clarion call? What could be more important than coming back with, I'm educated, I am empowered, and I believe in exploration? I'd like to leave that message with you at that point, but I'd like also to ask you to do one thing, please. Although this is a solo effort and I don't have Sarah here to monitor and control me and so on, I do want to ask you one thing. Respectonomics is facing this business of giving people back their dignity, the giving people back their self-respect. This is a message that I believe needs pressed home over and over again. It needs to be pressed in every quarter. So it has to be within one's own family, one's own community, with one's friends, in one's place of work, in one's place of political activity, in places of community activity, such as a service club. All of these places, we need to be on the ball to say the dignity of the human being needs to be regained, restored, to be reaffirmed, to be acknowledged. I can think of no greater gift that one human being can offer another than to acknowledge the other one. On that, I rest my case.